Awesome. I'm Joe EATON. I currently volunteer as the program director for the Faster Saves Lives program. We put together this panel tonight to provide the community, the schools, churches, businesses, other people the ability to come out and answer questions and hear from experts that we have worked with over the past 5 years on this program. I'm going to start off with just a little bit of history on the Faster Saves Lives program, because I don't know how many of you have a lot of details on this or where we've been, but the Faster Saves Lives program is funded totally by the Buckeye Firearms Foundation. We're a 501c3 nonprofit educational charity. We started back in 2008, and our foundation's initial focus was youth firearms safety training. We sponsored youth shooting events, young men and women both in the shooting sports at the national and international levels. We've worked with a partnership with the American Academy of Pediatrics in the state of Ohio for their Store It Safe program, which is a program to allow pediatric doctors to bring up safe storage with their gun-owning parents of the patients that they have. This program is really different than a lot of stuff that we've heard in the past, where the physicians were attempting to stigmatize gun owners. This program is set up so that the physicians assume from the start that there are guns in the house and that the families are gun-owning families, and then provide them information on safe storage devices and other ways that they can keep these firearms out of the hands of children and other untrained people. Our foundation provides free safes that they can make available through these pediatric ones, and we think that's really a huge step forward. Instead of having the firearm owners that are out there looked at as the minority, they are now looked at as commonplace. Let's do everything that we can to keep them safe. We've started some recent partnerships with the Ohio Department of Mental Health, with the Franklin County Law Services for suicide prevention services. We've also worked with, we have actually filed several lawsuits against the city of Cleveland whenever they have decided to get off the rails and ignore the state constitution. So our foundation had a lot of stuff going on. And then late in 2012, the tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary School started. And that was really a defining event for our foundation. A couple of things happened about that time to bring together what ended up being the Faster Saves Lives program. First of all is our foundation was invited to a town hall similar to this barely a week after the killings at Sandy Hook Elementary School. And as the board was preparing for this town hall meeting, we got frustrated that this was the same thing over and over and over again. Every time one of these murderous events happens at a school, we would go to a town hall or to a debate, and we would say our soundbite. They would bring in people who want to restrict the lawful ownership of firearms. They would say their sound bites. Everybody would pat themselves on the back and go home and act like something had changed, but nothing would change. And we decided at that point in time that we had to look to do something different. As a result of Sandy Hook, there was a school in East Central Ohio whose parent-led safety team charged the superintendent of that district with finding a way of including firearms as part of their safety plan as yet another overlapping layer of protection for their schools. The superintendent knew the work that we had done with firearm safety in the past. He approached us to say, what can I do to put together a safe and effective program? The combination of those two events launched what became Faster Saves Lives. At that town hall meeting that night, when our legislative liaison, Ken Hansen, stood up and announced that our foundation was going to fund a firearms, crisis management, and emergency medical training class for 24 school staff who wanted the training in how to effectively respond to these active killer events. We made the announcement, and then we sat back to see what would happen. We weren't really sure what would happen. Schools are not ones that are known to be the first to step outside of their comfort zone. And we even had some in the media that would interview our foundation president, Jim Irvine, and simply mockingly ask him, do you think you'll even find 24 people who want this type of training? And truthfully, we didn't know. What we quickly found out is that the demand from the school teachers, not only here in Ohio, but across the United States, was much stronger than we imagined. It was within the first month we had over 1,000 school staff which had signed up for the 24 slots that we had open. By the time we could conduct our first class in the spring of 2013, that waiting list had grew to almost 2,500 school staff. So we did our first class for 24 instructors with Mr. John Bennett out at Tactical Fence Institute in March of 2013, and then our foundation realized that we now had an even bigger problem. We couldn't stand up and say that we had made a difference when we had trained 24 people out of 2,500. We had to go back and find a way to get this training and make it available for schools. We went back to the foundation. I worked with them on some additional funding, and that became the Faster Saves Lives program. Since we started with that first class, we have now finished 5 years. We have getting ready to start. Have started our 6th year now. The 2018 training classes have already started. In that period of time, our foundation alone has worked with over 1,300 school staff from 225 different districts, and that's across 12 different states. The vast majority of them are right here in Ohio, but there is demand from all over. Our research shows us that 25 to 30 states currently allow their schools the ability to decide if they want to have firearms as part of their safety plan or not. We've trained these. We started in 2017. We did our first out-of-state class in Denver, Colorado. We are actually holding 3 more classes out in Denver, Colorado this year, and I'm currently working with schools in both Indiana and New York State to see about doing classes in those states also. The program keeps growing. What started as 3.5 days of intensive firearms, crisis, emergency management, trauma medical training is now grown into a 3-year curriculum for a lot of schools. After the first training, they came back the next year and said, what else can we do? We came up with a level 2 program, which is 3 more days of intensive training, and that wasn't enough for a lot of schools. We then added in the 3rd level where we go into the actual school districts. We work with the staff that are part of their response team. We work with their unarmed staff to get them the trauma medical training, because the rest of the staff are going to be there on event day also. They want to save lives, they want to help. Let's get them training that they're comfortable with. We bring in their local law enforcement, we bring in the local EMTs, and it's really awesome when you see an entire community coming together and putting the safety of the kids first. And that's what we did. These faces that you've been seeing scroll by up here are what this is all about. There's lots of people out there that are talking about things that we can do or should do ahead of time, and as a nation, and especially as gun owners, there are a lot of things that we can do better, but the reality is that superintendents, school districts, they need solutions that they can enact Monday morning. So we're going to move on here tonight. We did, Jim, I think this is, or Dean, this is where the video starts. For the media here earlier today, I've not seen this, and I don't know what we've got, but we did an active killer demonstration here to give an idea of what happens in these actual events, so we'll see how this works. I think there's actually...
You're all gonna die! Run. You're all dead. Whoa, guys. What part of no physical conference?
And that's what we see at too many of these events. There's no plan. There's nobody coming to help. We saw it at Virginia Tech, our young men and women in the prime of their lives sitting in their desks waiting for somebody to come by and murder them. We've got to change something. I think we've got one more.
Our foundation will invest in over $1 million in our
Pow, 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 pow.
All right. And she's actually in the sights using it.
Okay.
All right.
The events change quite a bit. We always get questions from schools, well, why do firearms have to be a part of this program? Well, number one, schools want something that's going to work. Stopping the killing is the first priority. A lot of times, that's simply somebody in authority standing up to these killers and saying, stop, what are you doing? We saw it here at Chardon High School with Coach Frank. I believe it was in Utah where the secretary said she simply stood up and said, get out of my school, and the kid turned around and left the school. But sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes simply being confronted by someone in authority results in more victims, such as we saw at Sandy Hook with the Don Hucksprongs and the Mary Sherlocks, or the Coach Fies, or the athletic director Hickson down at Parkland. In every school in these United States right now, there are certain staff who tomorrow will willingly go stand between a murderer with a rifle and these kids, and they will give their life willingly to buy these kids a few more seconds of life. Those are the ones that the schools are identifying, and they're simply asking them, what tool, what training, what are you comfortable with, so you have some option besides dying, so you have a chance to go home to your family at the end of the night just like you do every other night. Because people are there already. If they love these kids that much and they're willing to sacrifice that much, not for their own kids, this is for your kids, for our grandkids. As a school and a community and a nation, we owe it to them to give them a chance to make the decision on their own on what they're comfortable with. Then the schools implement a program, they do the ongoing oversight of the program, and we hope and pray that none of this has to come into use. And we can keep saying that even though it has already happened to schools that have been through this program. Enough of that, we're going to get on to our panel tonight. I'll do a quick introduction of everybody on the panel, and then we will go back and ask them to speak in particular about their involvement in this subject matter. First up, we have Dr. Richard Castor. Dr. Castor has 40 years of experience in public school administration. He's a former executive director of the National Association of School Resource Officers and a member of the Ohio Attorney General's Safety Task Force. He holds instructor credentials with the Ohio Police Officers Training Commission and the United States Department of Homeland Security. We also have, and it happens to be in order, Mr. John Benner. Mr. Benner is the president and owner of Tactical Defense Institute in Adams County. He's a 46-year veteran police lieutenant and Vietnam veteran who commanded the Hamilton County, which is Cincinnati Regional SWAT team, for 20 years. John and his instructors from TDI, they contracted with the International Association of School Resource Officers throughout the early 2000s to provide active killer training to school resource officers across the United States. Mr. Benner is the author of the Faster Saves Lives Safety Training Curriculum, and that experience he had training school resource officers for almost a decade was the basis for the curriculum that we're currently using in this program. The next panelist we have is Mr. Ron Borsch. Mr. Borsch served as the City of Bedford as a police and SWAT officer for 30 years. He specializes in the research of police response to active killers committing rapid mass murder. His exclusive database, The Stopwatch of Death, details almost 240 rapid mass murder incidents since 1975, and which provided the foundation to the solo or single officers life-saving others response utilized by police officers in more than 10 states. Mr. Borsch has served on the active killer and deadly force expert panels for the International Law Enforcement Educators and Training Association. The next one on my list is Mr. Scott Davis. I think we're getting out of order just a little bit. Scott is down there. Mr. Davis currently serves as administrator at Hunters Lane High School in Metro Nashville Public Schools and oversees the implementation of all the school emergency protocols. Scott's currently completing his Doctorate of Education and Administrative Leadership from Carson Newman University, where his thesis is focusing on the effectiveness of highly specialized suppression techniques and tactics at the onset of active shooter events. Our next panelist is Dr. Brian Springer. Dr. Springer is an associate professor from the Wright State University Department of Emergency Medicine in Dayton, where he's served since 2002. He also serves as the director of the Wright State Division of Tactical Emergency Medicine and oversees the tactical medical training and operational medical support of multiple law enforcement agencies in Southwest Ohio. Dr. Springer is a noted subject matter expert and adjunct instructor for the Ohio Police Officers Training Academy and helped create the critical injury first aid curriculum, which is being taught to all of the Ohio police officer cadets. We next have Deputy Quinn Cunningham. Quinn's a decorated law enforcement officer with 22 years of experience, including 17 years as a SWAT team leader. He's a firearms subject matter expert for the Colorado Police Officer Standards and Training and serves as the Academy Director of a regional law enforcement training facility and is a contributing writer for policeone.com. Responding to an active killer event in 2014 has greatly fueled his passion to protect our country's most precious resources, our children, and resulted in the formation of the Fortitude training concepts to train school staff along with his wife in the active killer preparedness and response. Our next panelist is Mr. Staggs, Jeff Staggs. He serves as the superintendent at Newcomerstown Exempted Village School District. During his tenure in Newcomerstown became one of the first districts in the state of Ohio to include firearms as part of their safety and security plan by training and arming schools teachers and other administrators. Jeff continues to work with school districts across the United States to help them implement safe and effective safety programs, including multiple layers of protection and effective response to violence. Mr. Staggs is a frequent presenter on the topic at the Ohio School Board Association's Capital Conference and the Buckeye Association of School Administrators Safety Conference. And last, we have Mr. Greg Henneke. Mr. Henneke has more than 25 years of experience in insurance risk management. Greg provides operational risk management support, advice, and counsel to public municipalities, schools, colleges, universities. He assists his clients in the identification and correction of potential risks, hazards that may result in injury, loss of property. Greg's certified playground inspector, Alice instructor, certified school risk manager, with his specialties including law enforcement, active killer, playground safety, school safety, and recreational liability. So our goal is to get you experts here from every area that may be involved in your school, your church, or your business making these decisions. So if you have a question, we have the person here to answer it. And with that, I'd like to we'll just start with Dr. Castor here on the end. Just have him speak for, guys, give me 2-3 minutes, something along those lines so they know what's going on. And get the questions ready because when they're done, we're moving straight into the question and answer session. So fill out your cards, get your hands up, and let's get the questions answered. Dr. Castor?
Good evening, everybody. Excuse me. Thank you for being here. Controversial topic, but necessary. Part of my background, as Joe shared with you, was with being the executive director for a number of years with the National Association of School Resource Officers. Giving you a little bit of history, how we talked about FASTER ending year 5, starting year 6, there's always a chronology of events. And it goes back to the officers that I worked with in a casual conversation probably around 2003, 2004, saying, I don't care what anybody says. In my school, I'm not waiting for anybody if there were, in fact, an active killer present. At that time, that was contrary, obviously, to a lot of police department policy. But they don't care. They were going to take care of business, and I highly respected them for that. We began to think, if we're going to send someone into harm's way, don't you think it might be a good idea to have them trained? I don't know of any training that went on back then that approached what we, and I say we, mostly through the efforts of John Benner, put together. You have to successfully get to the problem, and you have to successfully take care of the problem. Running helter-skelter is not going to get it done. So we began as an association to talk about, okay, how do we put something together? In a very short version, ladies and gentlemen, we ended up originally coming up with a 5-day program, strictly for law enforcement now. This had nothing to do with school staff. We put together this program and took it on the road. Matter of fact, our first class was in Hoover, Alabama, that we put this on, and then there were many, many more after that. That program, that curriculum, that training became really the nucleus of the FASTER program and our 3-day training. So it had its roots. We talk about this in the year number 5 or 6. We talk about the concept of arming staff. Technically, it got its start probably over 12 years ago. We didn't know it, but that's how the evolution took place. One of the things that hit me in my travels across the country with NASRO was the question I had from a middle school principal. I was the guest of the Sandoval County Sheriff's Office in Sandoval County, New Mexico. And this principal came up and said, "What do I do to keep my kids alive until the good guys show up?" Duh. Very legitimate question with not a really good answer. And I began to think about this. And then, of course, things happen. I shared with you the birth of this thing through John's efforts with NASRO. And it started there, knowing that not everybody was going to buy into it. I approached as the executive director. I was charged by the board of directors to talk to a couple of possible people to present the program. One nationally known police organization simply said, "Nah, we're really not interested." Big into quad, big into all that police stuff. Okay, got shut down. Not so with TDI. And the rest is history in terms of its evolution. Other than the question, I want you to think about it, other than the question that came from that middle school principal about what do I do to keep my kids alive, the second question I used to get universally is, well, you know, what can I do to target harden my school? And my response, this is what an attorney would say, answering with the question, what will your community tolerate? What will the community tolerate? I can spend the next 10 minutes talking about the Meillat School in Israel in 1972, subjected to a terrorist attack. They haven't had one since. I will promise you, I can't think of a school district in the United States that would tolerate what they did to protect the kids. I'm not here to praise Israel and their tactics, nor to criticize them. What are you willing to do locally? Your Board of Education is responsible for the education and the health and safety of the kids. So that's a community answer, and it has to be dealt with. So that gives you a little bit of background about where we are today with FASTER, how it got started, and some of the experiences I had that people across the country are facing this issue, and we just hope it gets better and better.
Thank you.
John.
Like Dick said, I became involved with this through NASRO, and the bottom line is we had to really stop and think about what we're doing and really study the problem to put on an effective class. And we do a lot of individual stuff because we train a lot of individuals, and so that made it pretty simple. And Ron here, that I guess get this thing next. He really was the guy that did a lot of the study and the stuff that I hate to do, like working on the computer and finding out information and stuff like that. I'd much rather have him do it and me steal it. It makes it much simpler that way. I always give him credit, but I still steal it. But bottom line is I realized when we were doing the NASRO classes. And first of all, the thing you have to realize, folks, is that not all policing is the same. Okay? There are really good police officers out there, and there are really bad police officers out there. You have no idea who is coming to help you. Okay? You look at the Parkland shooting here recently. Here's an SRO that stood outside his building with his kids in there and never went in. You look at another good example was Colorado. What was the school? Columbine. SRO took some shots from outside the school, okay, but he never went in. He never followed it up. Most people were teaching, you know, and I'm not taking anything away from anybody else. You know, our idea of the individual officer response, Ron had the same thing. We had it independently of one another, and I'm sure many other people across the country had the same thing, okay? So, you know, I don't think anybody's really inventing anything new. But we were like lemmings, you know, after, you know, but law enforcement has changed what they've done over the years. I think the Texas Tower shooting down in Texas was the first thing that really brought law enforcement ahead in tactical teams and getting long rifles and snipers and various and sundry things like that. And then we kind of got into the SWAT mode, and by the time we got to Columbine, the Columbine caused a major malfunction, but we did what we were trained to do. And I think almost every place in the country would have done the exact same thing. And so I'm not saying anything about any other law enforcement officer that I wouldn't say about myself, because we came up with this, all came up with the same answers. You know, we'll take, you know, we realized that we made a terrible mistake at Columbine by putting up a perimeter waiting for a SWAT team. At the time doesn't allow it, but we still didn't realize that. But we did change our method of doing business again. So we took in, we made teams of local officers. Okay, we'll get 3 or 4 guys to the scene, and then, or guys or gals, and then we'll go in. Well, we still didn't understand the problem, and I'm saying me as much as anybody else. The bottom line is, it was a flawed concept, okay? The individual officer response is really the only viable response, and my expectation is that law enforcement isn't a player in this at all. We are there. I've been a policeman for 46 years. I love law enforcement, okay? The bottom line is, we're not players in this, because we cannot get there fast enough to make a huge difference. Something goes on long enough, yeah, we can get there, and they're coming, and it doesn't matter how good they are, how much they want to do a good job. It's just that they're not there, and time is your issue, just like Joe was talking about. So consequently, you know, we believed for many years that after doing we did thousands of scenarios doing the NASRO classes all over the United States. And the bottom line is, what we found out is that if we've got an officer 100 yards down the hall, if you start the shooting right then and there, he knows he's only 100 yards away, and he moves down that hall to that school, to that room where the shooting is occurring. Everybody in the room is already dead or wounded. And it's like, this is not working too well. We need more guns. Folks, we never believed for a second that we would be able to implement that, quite frankly, until Sandy Hook. Unfortunately, it takes blood running in the hallways to get any change. But the weird thing is, law enforcement has at least tried to change. We've made a lot of mistakes, and I'm not, like I say, I'm blaming myself as much as anybody else. But the schools didn't change hardly anything. They just continued to march right on until Sandy Hook. I think the age of the children, you know, if you notice, it's not how many people get killed, it's who gets killed. If you look at the shooting out in Las Vegas, we lost a lot more of our citizens out there in a horrendous event, and that died pretty quick. You don't hear too much about that anymore, do you? But let them shoot up a school, and everything changes. Thank you.
Keep it just a couple minutes. I didn't say that. I just said let's keep it to a couple minutes.
I'll try to keep in that time. My name is Ron Borsch. In 1964, I'm very proud to have beaten the draft by enlisting for 3 years instead of the drafted 2 years. I served as 101st Airborne Paratrooper in Vietnam 65 and 66. After serving my country, I came home and served my community by 30 years with the Bedford Police Department. After 30 years, because I had so many instructor credentials, my chief and the other 6 chiefs of police decided that maybe Ron should found, manage, and train a regional police training academy. So that was a second career, part-time, to give me a break of 17 years. Today, I consider myself just a retired cop with a calculator that has come up with some pretty interesting things. While I was at SEAL Regional Training Academy in Bedford, Ohio, it was kind of interesting, like has been mentioned before, law enforcement was kind of lost about what to do after Columbine. They had alleged experts, and they probably were, that came up with things like a 4-man formation or a quad or a diamond, the essential of what I call rounding up a posse before taking any action to save lives. And I thought that was wrong. So I decided to start doing research, and research showed me that these gurus didn't know what was going on in the past or even in the present, nor did they know that their method of waiting for a 4-man response was the least effective. And my studies came to a conclusion: the most effective law enforcement response, because they're off-site, has been single officers life-saving others, SOLO for short. I hope you bear with me with some other acronyms I have. When some of the folks talked about being on your own, my acronym is YOYO, you're on your own. Another acronym is numerous unstable or troubling symptoms, NUTS. And I think at the conclusion here, you'll see how aptly named the FASTER program is by doing some simple tactical math. Today, I'm an amateur writer, and Buckeye Firearms have been so kind as to publish some of my stories among other places. And one that you may be interested in was the systematic failure of law enforcement. The systematic failure of law enforcement. I authored the article, and I'm not sure what the title is, so you might have to switch that around. But that is about the Parkland thing. And so through the years, it was quite an effort with arrows in the back from my own officers, my SWAT team commander, and experts that I would meet with at the International Law Enforcement and Educators Training Conferences. What they were doing was criticizing the single officers, life-saving others, and now today they have changed by quite a bit, and quite a bit changes, and we have all seen it on TV and the movies now that they're talking about more about the single officers life-saving others. So that certainly is a credit to John Benner, and I document that stuff. The speaker's off. Okay. Yeah. So one of the things that I'd like to share, and it backs up things like FASTER, and that's time. I call it tactical math. And the best way for you to understand this is the Gabrielle Giffords incident, the Congresswoman in Tucson, Arizona. I think that was about 2011. You need to understand, in 15 seconds, there were 6 murders and 13 wounded, a total of 19 attempted murders in 15 seconds. So for those that are interested, the potential is more than one attempted murder per second is possible. And there's also another one that was in Australia that had more murders, and it was the same amount of time. So I'll respond to questions later, but I certainly would like to thank FASTER for the time to present.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for having me out here and having all of us out here to talk about this program. Back when Commander Benner was putting together the curriculum for FASTER Saves Lives for educators, he asked me to put together a medical component. Ultimately, what we have now is what we call immediate casualty care. What we did in terms of creating that was to take tried and true techniques that have been used and are still used by the military and by law enforcement and make them accessible to individuals who are there again in our schools in these situations. You might notice that time keeps getting mentioned again and again and again. And when it comes to critical injury, time is of the essence. 4 minutes without oxygen and your brain will start to suffer from irreversible damage. 4 minutes of heavy arterial bleeding, there's a good chance that at that point you are dead. If we talk about even the best response in terms of for law enforcement or for EMS, if you happen to still fall in that window and suffer from an injury where you are actively bleeding or you have lost control, the ability to go ahead and to oxygenate, there's a good chance that even by the time medical help arrives, that you could be dead, that the kids who you're taking care of could be dead. And once again, let's even look at best case scenario as far as for rapid law enforcement getting there onto scene. EMS arrives, and let's say they are hot on the heels of those officers. EMS is not going to go ahead and enter into a hot scene like that. EMS is a valuable commodity. Now, of course, again, pre-hospital providers, this is not to denigrate them in any way. They're willing to go into risky situations. They're willing to run into a burning house to go ahead and save lives. But if they go willy-nilly into a situation where there's still rounds being fired, they could potentially end up being the casualty. So they need to approach a situation like that cautiously. Even if that caution adds only a couple of additional minutes, and those extra additional minutes, people can bleed to death. What we've done with the immediate casualty care is, again, take these proven techniques. We dispel myths, things like that tourniquets are bad, and get rid of those, and teach individuals how to go ahead and to control compressible bleeding, how to go ahead and open up the airway, how to go ahead and to patch up chest wounds, things that can keep people alive out in the field. What we find in any of the, whether it's active killer response, mass casualty situations, is that if we keep people alive long enough to get them to higher level of care, the odds of survival skyrocket. But somebody needs to know how to go ahead and do that immediate care at the point of wounding. You hear about the golden hour of trauma. Really, what we're focused on is that platinum 5 minutes. That if we can go ahead and do interventions right there at the point of wounding, we can go ahead and increase chances of survival markedly. These techniques are simple. You don't have to be a physician to do them. You don't have to be a medic to do them. We teach this to police officers. We teach this to civilians. These techniques are honestly very easy to do, but somebody has to teach you how to do them, and you have to have the right equipment. I feel that the immediate casualty care is a critical component of the FASTER program. It's also a component that even out of the context of an active killer event or a mass casualty event, injuries, structural collapse, motor vehicle collision, you can see these injuries and you still now have the means to go ahead and intervene and increase the chance of individual survival.
Good evening. I'm Jeff Staggs, Superintendent in Cumberstown Exempted Village School District in the eastern part of the state in Tuscarawas County. I've just got questions more than statements to you. Why is the safety of our students and children a negotiable item? Why do we make it political? I believe as superintendent, I'm in charge of two things: the education of the children of my district and their safety. You know, we want to have these discussions. We want to have these so-called experts give their opinion. Again, I don't want to play with kids' life with opinion. I want facts. And the fact is, if we have someone there at the event that can stop and minimize that effect, then more kids are going home to you. Every school shooting that there's been, you know, since I've been in this 5 years now, and our district has had an armed staff for 5 years, I've studied that. In every situation, there's been a staff member who tries to stop that event. Why is that? They're our children. We're with them every single day. We feed them, we clothe them, we spend our money. No different than if someone tried to break into your house tonight, what would you do? Would you do everything within your power to save your children? And I know that answer is yes. It's no different in a school. Why don't we give our people a chance, a fighting chance? But no, we want to make this into a gun issue. We want to make this into a Republican, a Democrat issue. We want to make it to a political. Our children's lives of going to school in their childhood, of going to a safe environment to learn, should not be a negotiable item. If we have a program and we have facts that state this is the way we should protect our children, that's what we should be doing. And sometimes I'm embarrassed as an educator because we pride ourselves in, you know, we look at things. Do we teach the same way we did 10 years ago? And that answer is no. But yet we want to revert back because we don't want to face facts. We want to face opinion of why this can't work. Well, teachers can't do this. That's insulting, for one. You know, I wasn't an educator before I got trained. And again, we have people willing and wanting to do this. They do it every day with your children. They keep them safe. But in the event of evil coming to their place, we have to give them a fighting chance. And, you know, and one more thing, and I'll pass this on. Think about this, because I really didn't think about it till this happened 2 years ago. We brought level 3 training into our school building on a Saturday with our local police department, TDI, and our sheriff department. We did a force-on-force training. It was a 3-story building, our middle school is. It's empty. I did not know this. I didn't know that they had an AR and they were shooting blanks on my 3rd floor. We were down in the cafeteria, which was on the 1st floor. Empty building. About every 15 seconds, they were firing off a round. We did not hear gunfire till about 20 feet before the cafeteria in an empty building. If you think about it, our buildings, our school buildings are built to keep sound in. If not, it'd be pretty impossible to teach. So, but that was one of the scariest moments, and that's after a couple years of already being armed, going, when would we have locked down? You have to know an event's going on before you enter your safety plan. By the time we would have heard, well, we did hear that gunfire, it's too late. Again, thank you.
Before I start, let me give a hearty amen to my fellow brother in education here, because as he can attest, you can't go into any group planning meeting or any teacher's meeting and you can't hear the words, what does the formative data say and what does the summative data say, and if the data speaks to it, why aren't we doing it? Amen? Amen. That being said, my name's Scott Davis. I am one of 6 principals at Hunters Lane High School and Metro Nashville Public Schools. We have 1,700 students, and I got into studying this process because in 2012, through a series of ordained events, I was a 2nd grade teacher, which was quite a stretch for me at the time. I'd always been in high school and middle school, but I was a 2nd grade teacher in an urban school. And that year we had 3 times that we crossed police tape to get into the building. And one was a drive-by shooting on the street outside the school. One was one of our second graders witnessed a murder across the street in a complex there, and we were on lockdown while the helicopter flew and they looked for the perpetrator. And another was a cab driver was shot at 3 in the morning on the back of the playground. And so we went through those lockdown experiences for an entire day trying to find who the murderer was and so forth. And right on the heels of that, Sandy Hook happened. And so I went home that evening and everybody was talking about Sandy Hook, and I had no idea what they were talking about. But I turned the news on and found out, listened to the radio on the way home, and it prompted me to think through that series of events that I experienced over the last 6 or 7 weeks that something had to be done. So the next morning I got up, went to work, went straight to the administrator's office, saw the lady principal there, and just said, you know, look, I don't know what our district is going to do, but if they move to armed teachers or arm, I volunteer today. I'm letting you know that I spent time in the Army. I'm familiar with weapons, and I believe I could pass any background check because as educators, and here's another one really interesting thing, there's no educator in America today that hadn't been fingerprinted, background checked, seen if they're on a sexual register, if there's anything in their history. If there is, they're not being an educator. So you got some of the most vetted people in the entire world that are working in that system. And so from there, I had finished my MBA, and so the next day, the principal comes to me and she says, you know, our grant manager in the office is leaving. Would you like to move to the office and become the grant manager? I said, I absolutely would. And so I ended up being in the front office. Now, I'm not sure if that was because I volunteered to protect the school or what, but I was credentialed to do that. And then I was encouraged by the Holy Spirit in my life, my wife, to pursue a doctorate. And so I was trying to figure out what that was. And somebody asked me, so, well, you know, just think about anything you would like to study. And the armed intruder was the first and foremost on my mind. So I spent the last 2.5 years, that's how I came across the FASTER program, spent the last 2.5 years researching and studying what I call the elapsed time theory and suppression engagement techniques within the educational establishment, because nobody knows the battlefield like I know the battlefield. I may not know each one of those 1,700 students by name, but I can walk through those halls and tell you if they're a stranger in the building. And every educator in that building can tell you if they're a stranger in the building. And so from that, I believe that the things that we need to do today are not just about the armed intruder. I think suppression engagement techniques and tactics delivered in a very specific, highly targeted, proficient way, with high proficiency, as FASTER requires at 93%. As Mr. Castro alluded to, what we're facing today is not the single armed intruder. See, everybody thought when Pearl Harbor happened that would never happen again. And then we had the Twin Towers. And then I look back and I go, how many times did they try to blow the Twin Towers up that nobody saw that they were going to blow the Twin Towers up? It's in the papers, car bombs, all those things. In our district alone, we have 83 elementary schools. That's 83 soft targets without SROs in them. 32 middle schools with unarmed SROs, and 16 high schools that have armed SROs, but none of them are tactically trained, and none of them are prepared for a terrorist attack on one of those schools. None of them. So it's not just the single armed intruder we're talking about. What we're talking about is the fact is a catastrophic event that will cause us to turn our schools into prisons and not the safe havens they are today with the culture they have today, so that we can educate students as you were educated when you were in school. I don't believe I'm a prophet, but I do believe that the problem is bigger than what we're discussing today.
Good evening. My name is Greg Henneke. I'm a risk manager for the Ohio School Plan. We are a property casualty insurance program for public schools and community colleges here in the state of Ohio. My job in risk management is, as Joe has read, is to review operations. And how we first got involved in this whole idea of armed staff was after the event in Sandy Hook. We heard the announcement, read the announcement about the FASTER program, and leveraged my experience in relationship with John Benner to let Jim Irvine let me into the program so we could monitor, evaluate, shadow the program. So we had an understanding of what was going to be taught, what was going to be trained. So as a school insurance program, we have to be able to underwrite that, understand everything, and determine if that was a risk that we wanted to take on. And fortunately, it was. We were able to, completed that course, went through, brought back feedback to our underwriting department, made that decision, helped to make that decision to decide whether or not we were going to insure schools that wanted to arm staff. And from there, we've moved forward to allow schools to do that. It's not our decision from the Ohio School Plan to decide whether or not we will allow a school to carry or not. That's not our decision. As you know, schools are required by state law to have a safety plan. And part of that safety plan, they make up that decision what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. Our job is to support them and guide them and help them manage that risk, that exposure. And so if they choose to arm their staff, we can help them through that whole process from the day they make the decision to arm all the way through implementation. And that's really our role and how we're involved from that standpoint. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Quinn Cunningham, and I flew in from Colorado for this town hall, and this is a really great event. My story is only going to take about 45 minutes. Is that good? Okay. Normally the story does take 45 minutes-ish, but I'm gonna break it down, and I'm gonna tell you why I do what I do. In 2013, I responded to an active killer in one of our schools. In that situation, we had an SRO in the school. Over his radio for the school, they said, "We're on lockdown," and he did not know why. He got on our Channel 1 and said, "The school's on lockdown, I don't know why." And in 46 seconds, he made it from one end of the school to the other end of the school and pressed on that subject until that subject killed himself. We lost one student, which is way too many. The reason I am here, the reason I do what I do, is when I entered that school, I got there pretty quick, but not quick enough. And when I went to the scene, I looked down. This individual had went through one of the doors with a shotgun and shot a girl in the face. On the brick behind where she was sitting, you could tell where he missed and you could tell where he hit. When I looked down, and I'll give you some extra content since I flew all the way out here, something that I've only told one person in my life. When I looked down at that scene, time ceased to exist. It slowed down. It wasn't a factor anymore. I looked down at this girl's blood, the footprints in the blood, the debris from the brick on the ground, the shell casings from the shotgun. And in the middle of this evil, in this chaos, was a lock of her hair. And she had very long, beautiful, straight hair. And in the middle of all this was her beautiful hair, transcending that evil. And I made a promise to her that day, if I could not give my life for you, I will give every day of my life for you from now on. So that is why this is so important. That is why I am here. Law enforcement, like we've said up and down this panel, is not the first responder. Our teachers are the first responders. Our law enforcement is second. Our fire guys, our EMS, third. When I roll in with my SWAT guys, we're fourth. And seeing what I saw that day, that death of innocence, the most egregious and horrible death that you could see. I saw it on the faces of the children as we got them out. I saw it on the scene. And I never want to see that ever again. And that's why I've dedicated my life to this program, because this is a good program. Our teachers will put themselves in front of our children to save them. And I'm going to do everything I can to help them out. Thank you.
we worked pretty hard to put together people that had expertise on every facet of this topic, and that's why we brought them together into one place. We've got quite a few questions here. I'm going to start going through these. I do want to note, if you've got any other ones, hold them up. Also, any of them that we don't get to tonight, we will make sure we get to the panel and let them answer it. We'll have it on our website available afterwards also. So, Jim, there's some more out here. Again, if we can, keep the answers as brief as possible, but hit on the details. And we'll just start off with, we've heard some of this over and over again, but one thing, and some of the questions I came up with, I'm going to read also in addition to this. My questions came from looking at the op-eds over the past few weeks and finding questions that were not answered in there. But one asked, doesn't the fact that there was an armed guard at Columbine prove this doesn't work? I mean, even at Parkland, the trained SRO didn't go to help. We've kind of talked about that already, but one of the panelists have more information on that. Quinn?
With my opinion in the Parkland deal, we had a retired on-duty officer who was just riding out the rest of his career. That is not the place for a retired on-duty guy. The SROs, in my opinion, should be the guys who don't want to do it, the knuckle draggers, the guys who won't take crap from the kids. I'm a father, I know how it goes. Won't take crap from the teachers and the parents, and then when it's time to go, they are ready to go. It is not the time to have an individual who's retired and just riding out their career. That's my opinion.
That is something I heard quite a bit in talking to schools also. It's another reason that they're looking of including their staff in here, because as Mr. Benner said, you don't get to decide who's coming and helping you. And while no program can be perfect, if a school is deciding who the staff is that is involved, what training they've had, what qualification level they're at least takes that one more variable out of the equation. The school knows what they're starting with should an event start. Mr. Borsch?
If I could add to that, the Parkland shooting, one of the things that probably went through this officer's mind, and we really don't know, there's another shoe or two to be dropped there. We really don't know what the circumstances were, but one of the circumstances were if you were at the tail end of your 30-year career, you had a wife and kids, and then you get one of the calls that it's kind of like, oh boy. To tell you the truth, these active killers are cowards, and when somebody confronts them, even unarmed people, many of whom have died, you think in terms of, oh geez, I could die on this. But just to find out what kind of a problem it was, I wanted to eliminate the training issue, because that's what I've done for many years. And the training issue, I contacted a major, a retired major of the police department out there, and I says, Rick, what can you tell me about their training issue there? And he said, Broward County, I believe that was the right county, says they have an excellent training program. They have people that come around and attend their training, and it's pretty much like yours. It is pretty much emphasized on single officers, life-saving others. And he says, I really don't know what happened, but it's not the program. I attended the program, and it's excellent training, so it's not a training issue.
Excellent. We've got a couple that are very similar here. One of them is a common argument. There's no way a teacher can be trained as well as an officer. And then they followed up specifically for you, Mr. Benner, in another question. After completing the 3-day training, have you ever failed a student and not given them a certificate to carry in the schools?
We have always given them certificates, but that doesn't mean they're authorized to carry. They haven't qualified. And we do take that very seriously. We've had people leave and can you train somebody in that length of time? Well, you got to realize that to go too faster in the first place, they have to have their CCW, so that's a whoopee 8 hours. Then they have to go to now they have to go to a primer class, which is another 8-hour class of fundamentals of shooting, okay, just shooting all day. And then they come to faster. What people don't understand is that most law enforcement have trouble qualifying, period. I won't say most, but a lot of them have trouble qualifying. We have our faster graduates qualify above the standard of an Ohio law enforcement officer. They have to reach a higher percentage, and they have to do a little bit more. We just had a 3-shot move and shoot, which is like very simple. The whole thing's simple. In fact, if you can't pass that, you really shouldn't have a gun. To be perfectly honest, because it's pitiful. And I don't think most places in the country are much different. So I understand Colorado was fairly easy as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was one of the first pushbacks that we heard about the program, is that only law enforcement are qualified enough to have firearms in the building. So even our first level 1 program, we hold the qualification level, as Mr. Benner said, to a level which exceeds what we hold police officers in the state of Ohio. So every one of our level 1 graduates has already demonstrated proficiency to a level which exceeds what we hold our police officers to here in Ohio. We did the same thing in Colorado. It gives a nice standard. We use the Colorado police officer standards out there. Just takes that argument out. If training is the problem, we will get them more training. And that's not good enough for a lot of districts. Local control is very important. We know of several districts where even that higher level of competence is not enough. They set their individual school standards even higher. I'll try and summarize this one. We've talked a little bit. Trained police officers freeze during life or death situations, and on occasions, and they have more training and experience than teachers will. Will teachers really be able to pull their gun and shoot the gunman, especially if it's a current student? And does the program really make us safer or just give us a false sense of security?
I'll attempt to answer that one. What I would think is from an administrative point of view, I'm hiring people all the time. So when I'm hiring a high-level math teacher, I'm looking for someone that's intrinsically motivated, that chose to go to college and learn math. Then they decided they were going to educate, so they learned how to teach math. And then they're good enough that I trust them to come into my building and teach the students that I have guaranteed that they're going to have a safe, a safe environment to learn in, with good building culture. And that teacher is going to be able to teach to a level that those students can pursue math at the next level and go on and pursue their dreams. I put that into every hiring decision. So when I look for someone that would fulfill that role that you're talking about, they're going to be a volunteer. They're going to be well-trained. They're going to have the intrinsic motivation to take that role on so that they protect those students in the building. There's not an educator that I believe in the business today that is not there for the best interest of their students. With that being said, every SWAT team has a sniper. So there is a certain level or certain aspects that you're looking for someone to be able to do that role in the building. And they're not police officers. They are not police officers. They are simply there to suppress the evil actor with suppression engagement techniques and tactics. That is their only role. That is their only thing that they do. And they have to be well trained in those tactics so it becomes muscle memory. So at the sound or recognition, then that is what they're doing, and that's all they're doing. So that your daughter and your son and your wife and your grandfather or your grandmother or your husband comes home to eat supper with you tonight at the table. That's what it's about. So that they can go on with their life and live. That's who I'm hiring.
Oh, just one comment. Anybody out there that's carrying a gun right now, I hope you've asked yourself this question: can I take a human life?
All right, what should an unarmed teacher look for to help them decide whether to stay in a classroom or flee a classroom during an active killer event?
If that's not already trained, it's too late. And let's go over to the statistic. When's the last time a child has died in the United States in a fire? Why? We do fire drills. We build buildings that virtually can't be burnt down. And the same thing with our lockdown procedures. They should know and not know. They should react. I don't want them thinking in that situation. We should run scenarios. In our particular case, anyone in my district, a cook, a bus driver, a custodian, can call a lockdown at any point. If they see something that is not right, we lock down. I don't want people to go, well, you know, in the manual, no. If something is wrong, that should be instinctual. So if they have to think about what happens, do I leave this or not, it's too late. Then we haven't done our job.
Okay, we had a few more that I've seen over is a lot of questions are why can't schools just hire more resource officers, or isn't lockdown enough? What about the other stuff we've heard about, such as ALICE training or metal detectors in schools?
First of all, if you're running a metal detector and somebody wants in, there's a thing called action versus reaction. You catch somebody with a firearm, they're going to have a shot at you first. You know, bottom line is they're going to get around that. They're going to get around stuff like that. There's no perfect answer to any of this stuff. You know, it's, what was the other part of that question?
The ALICE training programs and hiring more school resource officers.
All that would be wonderful. Can your district afford the SROs? That's the problem. You're talking about, in most places, probably $100,000 a year per person. If they're making anything at all, including your, you know, insurance and all the other stuff that comes into play with that. You know, if you can afford it, I think more is better. That's fine. It's still not enough. The more people that you have armed in your building, the better off you are. It's just that simple.
I'm going to steal this because this came from John regarding the part of the question dealing with the staff and how to react and whether I stay in the room, do I get out? You have to empower your staff to think on their own, folks. There's an old saying that says the best plan never survives first contact. Plan, plan, plan all you want, and I will guarantee you, you're not going to pull it off the way it should be. So you've got to give your people the ability to do what they believe is best under a crisis situation.
With permission, the people are using some of my research, and that's good training. But I'm firmly convinced that the very best protection for your students, your parishioners, your customers, your patrons, your employees is an on-site good guy with a gun. And we can't just put it down with one person. It's kind of like, it depends. Like, for instance, that Parkland shooting, that was a campus officer, and there were all kinds of well, I don't know how many. That was building number 12 that they were where the shooting took place. So that gives you an idea that this was an understaffed good guy with a gun. And on the subject, those of you that might be interested in the effectiveness of unarmed people at the scene, and I don't suggest that. In the book, Masad Ayub asked me to write a chapter in his book called Straight Talk on Armed Defense, and I the chapter he asked me to write would be the successes of unarmed citizens, because a lot of them die, you don't know anything about it, there's no witnesses, but in that case there's several dozen examples of how they're doing it, and I say probably the most common is body block tackle, and you just have to remember that people die trying. There's many sad stories, die trying. And when I mentioned before about Gabriel Giffords and a 15-second event, you need to know that the average event for incidences that meet my protocol is less than 6 minutes. And in the less than 6 minutes, you have to understand that there is, Ed Sano is editor for a couple law enforcement magazines. He said there's a 5 to 7 minute delay in notifying police, and you can understand why. In this case, I thought, where did Ed get this? I've met him, I know the guy. Where did he get that? I looked for these things and I couldn't find anything. It's okay, he says 5 to 7 seconds, I'll mention that to somebody. The very next incident that I looked at was in Finland, and it was a 10-minute murder time, and in this case there was a documented 6-minute time. It's kind of like, wow, Ed really nailed that. The average between 5 and 7 is 6. I'm a simple guy. The cop with the calculator. So when we look at the time for a delay in notifying law enforcement, then we look at the average time of 6 minutes, and to that must be added the variable time, very variable, is the police response time. Gabriel Giffords in the 15-second event there, over 1 attempted murder per second, the police arrived probably very good time, Tucson, Arizona, 4 minutes. I've been seeing a lot of 4 minutes time. So when I introduced the acronym YO-YO, you're on your own, it's kind of like, geez, if you were to know that the popular places for active killers by far throughout, back to my 260 incidents to 1975, we're talking about it's been educational facilities. And so if you already know you have educational facilities that are targeted by these people, unfortunately we have some scholars who haven't yet graduated from the School of Common Sense. Just for an example, we'll give you that one administrator has furnished a bucket of rocks for every classroom in his school district. And then we have another administrator in a different district that bought 600 16-inch bats. So in essence, this administrator, these two administrators have delegated protection for their students to their students while they're on their own, yo-yo. Now, I did hear a new one, and the new one was one school district is using pepper ball, which is in essence a paintball gun filled with pepper, OC pepper, and that's still a less lethal thing, so you need to understand if families are sending or participating together in the paintball game, and they're taking these hits and it didn't stop them except for a referee that says you're out, the impact by itself is not going to work. Now, the OC pepper cloud of dust is an experience that you have to have for yourself. Inhaling OC pepper works the very best. Getting it in your eyes is the second best, and then the rest of it is just a burning sensation. So I think we're not thinking, those scholars are not thinking through on many of these things by delegating the children to protect themselves as their primary plan.
Okay, how many of you have been maced? Let's see a show of hands.
That's the key thing, is schools shouldn't be taking anything off the table. If they want to train in lockdown or in ALICE, metal detectors, there can be some other problems with that, because now you're just creating a nice queue of people waiting to get in and out of that area in the morning. So there could be some downsides to that also. But also they have to look at not taking it off the table of giving their staff the ability to choose firearms as part of it. If the staff members want to choose rocks and baseball bats, that's up to them. But at least give them the choice of having something effective. I can pretty much speak for the law enforcement. We would never ask any of our law enforcement officers out there, require them to use a less than lethal means in a lethal force situation, and I don't think that we should ask our schools to do the same thing also. Kind of along those lines, what are the concerns about the armed offenders just mean more casualties from stray shots and innocents caught in the crossfire? I heard one school ask me, said, I don't want my kids in the middle of a gunfight. If we're bringing more guns in, won't that just make the schools more dangerous?
You want to take that? Sure.
It all comes down to training, and beyond the firearms training, it comes to the reality-based training, utilizing airsoft and things like that. And not everybody can do this, and that's fine. And I'm fine if we have a teacher who is a student in the class who can't pass the qualification, is not doing well in the reality-based training. I'm cool with that. They just don't have it. That doesn't mean they're a bad person. It just means this is not for them.
I think that's one of the misconceptions we hear more than anything, is a lot in the media want the public perception to be that these schools are standing at the front door handing out firearms to the teachers that walk in. It's not a program for everyone. The ones that don't want to be a part of it, there is nothing wrong with that, and there is nothing wrong with them. But the ones who do want to be a part of it, the schools have to look at a safe and effective way of implementing it.
And we have had lots of people walk away. We've had quite a few of them that realized during the training, this isn't for me, I'm done. And that's fine, not a big deal.
Just a quick answer also to the previous question. So an active killer wanders into your school and is shooting students. Would you rather have that killer engaged in a gunfight with an armed teacher who's trying to resist and stop that threat, or just have them continue to pick off kids?
And then beyond that, when you look at these active killer events, when an active killer has been engaged, they either turn the gun on themselves or they've ended in a shootout. The last three since January, last four, have not ended that way. They've ended by apprehending the shooter, which to me is a very troubling aspect to this whole transition of what's happening, because now we got people that possibly are copycats, because now they know, just like the one in Florida this past week, where the article was, or the title was, hey, the teacher talked him down. That's not really what happened. When you read the article, he had already shot somebody, he put the gun down, he came to the teacher, he saw her, he knew her, they had a relationship, and he made the statement, hey, I'm insane, you need to get somebody to come get me. That is a horrible thing to be allowing to happen in our schools.
Back to Dr. Springer-Wise there. The question is, how long does it take to bleed to death from a gunshot wound?
Yeah, it's when it comes to bleeding to death from a gunshot wound, it comes down to the three tenets also of real estate: location, location, location. It depends on where you have been shot. Again, an active arterial bleed from, let's say, the femoral artery in the thigh, somebody can bleed to death in as little as, again, 3-4 minutes. Other locations on the body, that bleeding may be slower, but also still, even after 3 minutes of arterial bleeding, even if it's not enough to be lethal, once you've lost enough blood that your body has now gone into what we call hemorrhagic shock, that the organ systems are not getting adequately perfused with oxygenated blood, already at that point, the odds of survival start to drop precipitously. If we address bleeding at the point of wounding and get that bleeding under control before shock sets in, odds of survival are extremely high. If we allow that individual to bleed for several minutes unchecked, even if they haven't bled to death, their odds of survival plummet.
I'd just like to add on to that, if you have the stomach for it, pull up the 911 calls from the Townsville Elementary School. And if you can listen to these school staff begging for help to come, knowing that you're listening to a young 6-year-old boy die in the background because they don't have the tools and the training needed to keep this young man alive. He was shot in the leg, which extremity wounds with a firearm, even in a small kid with a high-powered rifle, properly treated, are some of the most survivable type of wounds out there. It gets to the point where you hear the teachers saying he's turning blue, we're putting an AED on him. These teachers are doing everything they can think of to keep this kid alive, but they hadn't taken the time to understand that tourniquets are your friend. AEDs are for heart attacks. The most horrific part is you listen to them begging and pleading for help, and all the dispatcher can say over and over and over is they're coming as fast as they can. They're coming as fast as they can, over and over. With a little training and a little tools, instead of this young boy losing his life, he should have grown up with a gnarly scar on his leg, and what hell of a story to tell as he grew up. But it didn't. His life ended that day because of simple tools and training that the schools didn't take the time to get in and give to their staff. Quinn, they ask, how many armed people does it take to protect a building?
All of them. I think the security, we've talked a little bit about layers. I think the security should be in layers. There should be people trained in non-armed response. There should be obviously the armed response and things like that. The students should be trained, and all of the teachers should have some type of training. All of them is not really a joke. These are kids. If it was my kid in that school, as much as a caveman as that little guy is, I would want everybody armed and everybody ready to defend him.
On these force-on-force rehearsals, simulations, and reality-based training, all of that is important. But when you start talking about staffing, I just can share with you what I advise churches. A small church should have no less than 2 armed good guys in it. And the bigger you get, you run into a staffing problem, and you are overloading the system. It doesn't matter whether it's an electrical system or a water system. When you are overloading the people, like the Broward County SRO that was responsible for multiple buildings, and I guess he did a really good job on getting to the scene very quickly, but the unfortunate problem is he did nothing that saved lives there. And as I understand it, it may have been him that said over the radio, don't come within 500 feet, this may be an outside shooter. It's kind of like, okay, so the people that are well trained to do the right thing, their guy on the scene, it's kind of like, okay, don't get any closer. It's kind of like, well, that led to very bad consequences. So you don't want to run into a staffing problem. And if it's a big school, just remember the gunfire is not a reliable indicator. Our experience, my experience with evaluating 3 different communities' responses was that when you have a 38 blank, and for those that know something about the 38 blanks, they are louder than a 38 with a real bullet in it. And we found out that the minute you start going way down the hallway, around the corner, or up the stairs, you can't hear it over ambient noise. And it's very common for people to not even think about gunfire. They'll think about firecrackers. They'll think about somebody dropped a book. They'll think about some work being constructed outside or inside or whatever. And they actually have a mental denial that it really is gunfire. They prefer to not believe that, unfortunately.
Yeah, that is one thing which is a common misconception, is that you'll know that this is going on. I took a call last week from one of the schools here in Ohio who had an active killer event at their school. The young man snuck a rifle in down the leg of his pants, was in the restroom putting it together when another kid ran in and confronted him about it. At that point in time, the killer turned the gun and shot himself in the head, and this was inside a restroom right outside the main offices. The principal told me that the restroom opened up into like a foyer and then right out into the hallway with the administrative offices, and it took the other kid running into the office to tell anybody that anything was going on. The first staff member in there thought it was a medical emergency because the killer fell on top of the gun and all they saw was blood running from his nose. Thought it was a nosebleed or some type of medical event until they went into the restroom and saw what had actually happened in there. And this is right outside of their administrative offices. I knew we'd have to get around to this soon, Greg. That's why we had you up here. What is the employee's liability for the actions of an armed employee, and how much additional insurance costs are associated with armed staff? Is there the same risk of civil liability for teachers as for officers in the line of duty? And does the school provide liability protection for the staff if they have to use their firearm?
How many questions were there?
Tell us everything that everybody always wants to know.
All right. Okay, so from the additional liability, obviously you bring a firearm into the equation, yes, that's additional liability. I think everybody can understand that. So typically we've seen since this all started in 2013, one of our competitors started charging a premium surcharge of about $2,500 per person. So 4 people, $10,000. At that particular time, the Ohio school plan wasn't charging anything. Some of the information on those competitors, those numbers have dropped down to around the 700, 750 range if they haven't gone through and actually threatened non-renewal for having armed staff. In turn, the Ohio school plan does now charge a very minimal charge. We go through an application process to understand what the school is going to do, how they're going to implement it, and we have some very specific questions that they have to ask or have to answer. Part of that process is along with myself and my supervisor, where we will also contact and review verbally over the phone with typically the superintendent who's in charge of implementing this program to make sure that they have a good grasp on it, or find out what part of the process they're in. Are they thinking about this? Have they already authorized? Are they already into implementation? We have some guidelines to help them and assist them through that process. What was some of the other parts of that question?
Are they going to sue me?
Pardon me?
Are they going to sue me?
Oh yeah, you can guarantee there'll be a lawsuit. Yeah, and a good plaintiff's attorney will use the shotgun effect. They will apply the lawsuit to everybody. One of the things that we utilize will be the Ohio Revised Code 2744, which provides a political subdivision civil liability immunity protections. Most of my experience has been in the Ohio plan, where we ensure local forms of government, and we utilize that same defense because public schools are political subdivisions. I'm not giving legal advice, by the way. Just basic explanation here. So we're going to utilize the statutes that give us immunity protections from civil liability. That's completely different from a criminal element or a criminal charge. But we're going to use those defenses to the best of our ability to defend that district should something ever happen or should a cause of action lawsuit take place. Part of the process that we go through our risk management process is to make sure that, pardon the pun here, but the schools are crossing their T's and dotting their I's as well as they can. Our ultimate job is to defend that school district in court. However, we can only do the best job that we can do is what work did they give us, what material did they give us to work with? Great. Were they sloppy, or were they very accurate and very detailed? Were they very thorough? So we have we have some criteria that we go through and help them manage that process to make sure that they're in the best position possible should we have to defend them.
Awesome. We got just about 5 minutes left. I want to hit a couple questions here. I think this may be combination question for Mr. Staggs and maybe Mr. Benner. Two of them together say, do you train staff members to leave the classroom and to engage the gunman? And of the teachers who are armed, how do they carry and secure the weapons?
First of all, let's talk about the staff and what they're going to do if something happens. It's my understanding that from most districts, and I can't speak for all districts, but if a school staff member or a school teacher is responsible for their kids, they can't leave them unless they get them in some other responsible adult's hands. So we teach them to be two different things. One is to be a hunter. The other is to be an ambusher. In other words, if you're stuck with your kids, you've got to get them put it in a safe area, and you will now become an ambusher. That person comes in your room, you're going to ambush them and do what you need to do to stop them. If you are free when something happens, you're not responsible for children at the time, or you're a principal, or some other type of administrative job, then you're a hunter. In other words, something happens, you're going to hunt them down and do what you need to do. And so consequently, those are the two different roles that they can play. And all the staff members that go through our training understand that, or they certainly should, because they get taught that. In the second half.
How do they generally carry or secure the firearms?
We have districts that put them in lock boxes. Okay, I disagree with that. We did a level 3. I think it was last year at one of the schools, and they had lock boxes, and we proved to them. The only problem was the people that really made the difference in the decisions weren't there to see it. And so we proved to the staff that already had the problem that they were in trouble if something happened, because now you got to go run back and get it. You're eliminating a lot of the time. You're causing the same problem. We recommend different types of holsters for the staff. We'd like them to carry them on them. No purse carry or anything for the females or the males. I'm trying to be sensitive here, okay? Okay, I don't like that. But seriously, if they have good holsters and a little practice with that, and I've been told by some of the staff members that have lived through this, I certainly haven't, but the first couple of weeks that the kids find out that they're armed, everybody's looking, to see, who's got a gun, who doesn't, and within a couple of weeks, they forget about it, and it all goes away.
Okay. This one is specific for Jeff Staggs again, or for the whole panel, because we had several questions very similar to this. How or what did you do to get your community on board to have them okay to have armed staff in the schools, and what are the beginning steps as a parent can do in their community to encourage schools to look at a program like this?
Actually, in our particular case, I had parents come to me after Sandy Hook and say, Mr. Staggs, can we do a safety committee? I said, by all means, yes. We met several times. In fact, I think we met like 9 or 10 times. We looked at safety plans. We looked how to harden our buildings. We did all that. And the parents said, well, we know there's more we can do. We know that the Ohio Revised Code allows the Board of Education to authorize certain staff members who have concealed carry to do that in the school. And I said, well, and remind you, that was 5 years ago, right after Sandy Hook, and I said, I'm going to put you in front of the board. And they did. And they made a presentation to our school board in open session. Our local newspaper was there. It was front page the next day. So I looked at the board president, I said, the next board meeting, we're going to have it in the gymnasium, because that's how many people are going to come. Next month came, no one came. So we thought, okay, we're going to have an open session, work session. We're going to invite Buckeye Firearms, and we're going to invite The different faster was just starting at that time. The first class was developing. We brought our sheriff, we brought the police department, and we talked about the negatives, the positives. Any parent could talk. No one came and complained. So we then sent an employee to the first faster class. He came back and presented in open session. Again, we were just trying to get the feedback. What does our community want? I'm not going to go through the whole scenario. 5 years later, I've not had one parent come to a board meeting to express anything but positives for this program. So I think it just needs to be, you need to present the facts, get those facts in front of your school district. Ask the questions. Okay, I'm presenting you with facts. I'm not presenting you with opinion. This is a fact, and I can back that up. What is your reasoning for not? In our situation, the question was a while back. We are an Appalachia school district in the eastern part of Ohio, home of Woody Hayes, Newcomerstown. We couldn't afford a school resource officer. I would love to have a school resource officer. I would still have both. I think that's the perfect world. I didn't want to come to a situation where the next year we had budget cuts. Do I eliminate an English teacher? Do I eliminate a school resource officer? So if I eliminate a school resource officer this year, what am I saying about the safety of the children? I don't care about it anymore. I didn't want to have to face that situation. We are presenting answers to those questions. And I would just ask, give me your facts on why you don't think what is a better solution to this problem.
And that's something we're more than happy to help you with. We work with hundreds of school districts across the nation on this topic. If we don't mind meeting with anybody, because as I say, when we've got good factual information, we're right. If they will open their minds and listen, let them make informed decisions. If they need to hear from us about the program, if they want to talk to school administrators, we can get them in contact because they speak school language. If the school SROs want to talk to the law enforcement or any of the trainers, we can bring them all together. We want to have the questions, we want to have these hard conversations, and we want to make this program better. So we'll wrap up here because we're just about out of time. There was one question I'll run through real quick here. Basically, the question is there any national movement that anybody is aware of for unifying standards or training to respond to active killers like this? I know some states have different things out there, Texas and Oklahoma.
I would say not really. It's I think we're as close as anybody. Especially Colorado's picking it up. Maybe we're going to Indiana. And we'll get maybe a few others. Georgia, I know, is interested at this point in time. We're kind of setting the standard for that, and I say we, all of us up here. The bottom line is there's going to be some political fallout in different places that'll probably never go. I mean, your chances of getting Massachusetts or New Jersey or, last time I went to New Jersey, I committed like 38 felonies. Just going into the place. I won't go up there anymore. But every place in the country is different. In all sincerity, and there's a lot of ego involved in a lot of this stuff as well. So that's especially in the law enforcement communities. Quinn tell you the same thing I will. The egos are just monstrous, like in so many other things, okay? Not just our little world.
And that's one thing we work very hard with, is to keep the local control, and that's why we have safe and effective programs here in Ohio and many other states, is because the individual schools get to make the decisions. They get to decide on the people. They get to decide on the training levels that they're going to have. They get to decide on the qualification levels. They get to decide on the oversight. And an individual school is going to know its students, its staff, and its community better than anybody else is. And more importantly, they'll be able to react and make changes quicker than anyone would ever be able to do at a state level or a national level. In fact, it's frustrating every time an event happens, we have politicians across the United States, help me write a bill to fix our law here in X state. And you look it up and their law mirrors Ohio. I have to tell them, sit down, shut up, and find funding for your schools to make this happen. The law works. The schools have total control over it. That means you have total control over what happens in your districts. The last question I'll touch on is, have there been shootings in which armed staff have stopped the shooter? Yes, we have had lives saved with staff members that have been through the Faster Saves Lives program. The one situation that we had was the best outcome that we could ever hope for. There were no lives lost. The violence kept escalating and escalating to the point where the young man was reaching into his, I believe it was a van, to pull out a rifle. When he turned around and saw it was a principal at his school standing there with a firearm of his own pointing at it. The principal says the boy realized he had made the worst mistake he had ever made in his life and immediately dropped the firearm. That's the best outcome we ever hope for, and we hope we get nothing else for that. The staff and the teacher, the principal gets to go home, the young man gets to get the help that he obviously needs, and lives were not ruined that day. There's been other ones from the medical side. We've had reports of lives saved with the medical training, not in active killer events. It was construction accidents at the school. And that's why it's so important to put every layer that you can in place inside your schools. How do you get in your schools? We had the town hall tonight. We'd like to think that you managed to get some of your people out here. If you've got school board members that'll listen to you, Jim Irvine jokes when he talks to people, if you go to your school board and you're the one person talking about arming staff, you're the crazy gun nut. It really takes three of you, because if you get a second person, they look at you and say, isn't that cute? The crazy gun nut's found a buddy. By the time you get three of you going in, saying the same thing, demanding the same answers, three people are a committee. They can't look beyond that. They have to start providing you answers at that point. So look within your peer groups, look within your other teachers. A great example, we had CBS National News come in. Simply go to your school board and say, hey, I was watching CBS National News and saw about this nonprofit charity in Ohio that is doing this right here in our state. Have you looked at this? Have you done something? What are you doing? And get them to answer your questions. Get them to call us up and let us educate them. That's what we're all about. I'd like to thank all the, yes.
Remember, they're elected officials. Okay? So the more people you get to go to the board meeting, the more elected they feel.
That's right. Again, I'd like to thank the panel. We'll probably have just a couple minutes. We've got to vacate out of here pretty quickly, but again, I'd like to thank all of them. They traveled from across the country to come in here and to provide this information for you tonight, and I don't think you will ever find a more knowledgeable panel of experts on all facets of this topic than what we were able to put together tonight. Thank you, guys.